everyone, welcome to another episode of So Not Scary. In today's episode, I'm going to show you how I made these DIY Harry Potter robes for a doll for my daughters. And before we delve into it, let me just quickly say that this was a particularly challenging project for me. I was thinking making a costume for a doll would be easier, so if I make it first, I'll be able to make it better for my daughter, but this turned out to be quite challenging, so let's go ahead and get started. I began by folding a piece of paper into quarters, and then I took the doll and I placed her halfway across the fold, and I opened out her arm, and then I used her own body to trace out the outline of her robes and darkened the outline, and then I cut the outline out to make a pattern. Here I made the mistake of making the pattern a bit too small, as you will see. I used the doll's body again to mark out the front half neckline of the doll, and then I opened up the back and marked out the back half of the neckline as well, and this is what it looks like. Now I separated the front piece from the back piece, and using a pencil I labeled which one's the front and also which one's the back so that I remember what I'm working with. Now I folded each piece back in half and cut the necklines out so that when I open it up, I have two separate and distinct front and back pieces to work with. Now I folded a black piece of fabric in half and layered on a yellow fabric for Hufflepuff. Then I drew a vertical line down the middle. Now using the front pattern piece, I aligned it with the vertical line and carefully marked out the front neckline. And here you can see it looks kind of like a half crescent, which is exactly what it's supposed to look like. I repeated the same process for the back neckline as well, quickly chalking it out with a pencil, and I ended up with this kind of V-shaped neckline to work with. Guys, if this video is making sense, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. That's it. Now I pinned all the layers of the fabrics together and prepared to sew all along the marked pencil lines that I had just drawn. So first I sewed up along one side of the vertical line, and then I painstakingly went around the neckline, turning after every one or two stitches because it was a really tiny little neckline. And then after the neckline I went down along the same vertical line as before, and this left me with a tiny little gap between the two vertical lines, which I would then use to cut out later. This was a particularly fiddly step, but just watch on and see what happens. I now used a sharp pair of scissors to cut vertically up that pencil line, and then very carefully I cut out the neck hole for the ropes as well. And because the yellow fabric was rather untidy, I decided to tidy it up all around as well, using the same sharp pair of scissors. This was a really simple step, and it didn't take long at all to trim away the excess fabric. Now at my ironing table, I carefully turned the yellow fabric over onto the wrong side of the black fabric and carefully pressed down the seams to make it stay in place. This was a really fiddly step because where the neckline was, it was just such a small curved shape. I had to go over that spot over and over again just to make the fabric stay. But with enough struggling and enough fiddling, it was done, and I was left with this shape to work with. Now I did another simple straight stitch all the way around to keep that yellow fabric stay in place. Especially around the curves of the neckline, I had to go really slowly and stop and turn every one or two stitches to make the sewing machine go around the curves, but before long it was done. Now I used the paper pattern to mark out the sleeves of the Harry Potter robes. So first I did the front left half and then the front right half, and then I used the back pattern piece to mark out the back of the sleeves as well. So this was really quick and easy, didn't take long at all. Now I used some more yellow fabric and slid it underneath those marked lines, and I pinned it in place. And I repeated the same on the other side as well, just slipped the yellow fabric underneath the black and pinned it in place. And the idea is that I will be sewing a simple straight stitch along both those dotted lines on the black fabric. So now back at the mini sewing machine, I simply did a straight stitch on that dotted line, sandwiching both the black and yellow fabrics together, first along one sleeve, and then I repeated the same on the other sleeve as well. Here, as you can see, I made the mistake of not leaving enough black fabric at the edge, but I worked with it anyway. Next, I snipped away the extra fabric on both sides of the sleeves, and then I did a slit running up to the stitch line, but not quite slicing through the stitch line. And then I snipped even closer to the stitch line so that there is very little extra fabric left. Now I used a tiny pair of sharp scissors to make small slits along the curve of the sleeve, and this would help me fold back the yellow fabric onto the wrong side better, and this would allow me to get a nice smooth curve along the edge of the sleeves. And then I stabilized the fabric where it belongs using a hot iron, and I did this for both the sleeves. Now I folded the whole project back in half as it originally was, lining up the sleeves perfectly, and pressed it down again so that it stays put. And then I used one pattern piece to mark out the outlines of the sleeves as well as the body. So I used a pencil on the yellow fabric, and for the black fabric I used a silver pen and just dotted out the outlines of the robes. Next, I cut away the excess fabric at the bottom, and using the mini sewing machine, I did a straight stitch along that robe outline that I had just drawn. And where the sleeves ended, I made the extra effort of doing a reverse stitch by going back over the last few stitches and then back to the end again. And this would reinforce the sleeves as we turn the robes right side out. So that's done, and now using a sharp pair of scissors, I cut away all the extra fabric along both the sides of the robes and under the sleeves, and this left me with an inside out robe which is nearly done. Now for the bottom hem of the robe, I tried to press it down to make a nice crease before I could sew on it, but as you can see, it was a real struggle because it was a narrow hem and it kept popping back up again, so I just held it down in place and sewed it down. For the hood, I cut out this house-like shape out of both the fabrics and sewed along three sides of this house shape. And then after this was done, I turned it inside out and then folded it in half again and sewed along that top peaked edge once more. And then after that was stitched down, I snipped away the corner and painstakingly turned it right side out, only to find that it was way too small for the doll, so all of that effort went to waste. So then I cut out a new hood and sewed a bigger one for the dolly, which thankfully fit her better. As you can see, this is much more bigger and it fits over the top of her head just fine, so that worked out, but it was a work of patience. And then I just pinned the hood to the back of the robe, making sure that the centers of both the fabric pieces are aligned. And then using lots of pins, I held the robes and the hood in place. And then I hand sewed the hood onto the robe using a simple whip stitch. I used a simple yellow thread and I only stitched through the linings of both the robes and the hood so that it doesn't show onto the black fabric. So this was simple enough, and there it is. The dolly is all done. She's wearing her Hogwarts Hufflepuff robes, as you can see. And when I turn the sleeves up, you can see a flash of yellow, which looks amazing. I installed a little cam snap up the front so you can button and unbutton the robes. And there it is. It's all done. This was a work of patience. It took a lot of time, but I enjoyed it. I learned a lot about garment making in this process. If you like this tutorial, please do give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel, and I shall see you soon. Bye.